Welcome back to Tenure, a game menu, where we break down how you get tenure and explore different aspects loosely related to tenure. My name is An Li, a Chinese historian works at the University of Texas at Dallas. Today, I am joined by Dr. Anne Gray Fisher. Dr. Fisher will be Associate Professor of U.S. Gender and Sexuality History at UT Dallas as of September 2025. Her first book is entitled The Streets Belong to Us: Sex, Race, and Police Power from Segregation to Gentrification. And she's currently working on her second book, Going Ballistic: A Concealed History of Feminism and Guns. Dr. Fisher has won several major teaching awards at UT Dallas, and she teaches courses on women and LGBTQ history. Dr. Fisher, or Annie, as I call her, is the first guest we talk with in the show, as she described as the guinea pig for this interview series. Compared to most of us who spend our whole lifetime at school, Annie did not start graduate school until she was 30. She worked many different jobs before academia, including at a flower shop, which shows in the way she interacts with students and colleagues. Every encounter is always warm and responsive. Annie is also one of the few guests that are willing to share the details about salary, raises, assets, and loans. In her words, something that we should talk more open, but it is not always transparent. I started the conversation by wanting to know how Annie got tenure at an R1 university, but I finished the conversation by having the feeling that tenure is not the ultimate goal, but a process to internalize the work discipline and a path to get to where we want to be. To Annie, it is the freedom to engage in activism and have a stronger voice in matters that she cares. So, what is the mysterious tenure process? What does Annie do in and outside of the job? And how does a professor live her life and spend her money here in Texas? Let's listen in. Good morning, Annie. Welcome to the show. And please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, and thank you so much for bringing me on this morning. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I'm the only member of my family to leave the state. I started graduate school when I was 30, so I have a slightly non-traditional path to academia. And I've worked since I was in high school, and I've had many jobs. I worked in retail and flower shops, in a bookstore, as a customer service representative. I've worked in many offices that were toxic and non-toxic. My last job before I returned to graduate school was at a labor union, and it was there where I saw a poster that changed my life. My boss had a framed 1976 poster advertising a fundraiser for Puma, the Prostitutes Union of Massachusetts. And it was that poster and the questions I had about it that sent me back to the archives, to graduate school, and changed my life.
It's so interesting that you mentioned you had so many jobs before, because I can totally see that from your interactions with students and colleagues, you always give out a sense of warmth. Because this show is mostly about tenure process and faculty development, so where are you in terms of the tenure process?
So I am currently up for tenure. That process started September 1st of 2024 when I submitted all my materials. I believe as of December 15th, my file was closed, completed, and submitted for review by a number of committees. So I am waiting to hear back on the decision of my tenure case. April 1st is the traditional day that faculty get notified if they were approved for tenure. So April 1st of this year.
So submitted the tenure portfolio in September, and now in the middle of a bunch of reviews, and the results gonna come back in April, so very soon. So for the audience that are not quite familiar with the process or in the middle of the process, could you describe the requirement for tenure at your current institution?
Sure. Yeah, and at my institution, and I think this is sort of the national standard, the expectation in history, which is a book discipline, is the publication of a book, plus some kind of publication or evidence of research activity that speaks to the next research project. And I think the key there is to ensure that the faculty member will continue their record of research, service, and teaching after they've received tenure.
So it is a public R1, and then so a book is required, and plus several articles. And it is, I assume that is the 2-2 teaching load. So we teach 2 courses per semester.
That's right. And I do appreciate that's very important what you know that the tenure requirements are different at different institutions because we are at a Carnegie R1 institution, the expectation is a book. However, at a teaching institution, the standards would look different and teaching might play a larger role in tenure consideration.
That's for sure. Now let's move on after we talk about the requirements and let's move on to the supports. So what is the support from your institution so far, like for you to get through this process?
Yeah, and I'm really grateful that you centered the support because so tenure evaluations look at three pillars, particularly at a research institution like ours. Research, teaching, and service. The definitions, of course, of what these three pillars look like and what counts toward these three pillars will be different at different institutions or for different scholars. Um, but it really requires structural supports to ensure that faculty can proceed along these three tracks, right? Engaging in a variety of different labor. I really had the gold standard in terms of faculty support throughout my career at UT Dallas. I think that what I received is what every scholar should receive. I had ample research and travel funding every year, and I currently still have access to ample teaching and research funding. I had 1 semester of leave after my third year review. That's the sort of midpoint probationary evaluation of faculty to see if they can proceed to the next 3 years before they go up for tenure. So after I passed my third year review, I got a semester off, and it was really a gift to have that time. But that was also personally when my father died that semester. So while it was a gift to have the time, I was able, instead of using it toward research, I took advantage of that time to travel to LA and help care for my dad in his final months.
I'm so sorry for your loss, Annie. I do think that compared to research fund, time off is more important in terms of the tenure process, like because having a book is a requirement, like for tenure in a research one university. So let's talk about your tenure case or tenure portfolio. You mentioned that there were 3 different aspects, research, teaching, and service. So could you describe to us a little bit, so what did you do? What have you accomplished in these 3 aspects? Give you an opportunity to brag about it.
Well, you know, I'm going to deflect. Um, but I think so in terms of research, you know, because I was enormously supported, and I do want to say that I also had enormous supports with external fellowships prior to getting my job at UTD, which made it possible, I think, to be competitive on the job market. So my research has been consistently funded during graduate school. When I was a visiting assistant professor, a short-term job after graduate school, and then I started my tenure track position at UTD. So all of those supports helped me to produce my first book, along with the other research activities I engaged in, publishing articles. I co-edited a special issue of the Radical History Review, which was deeply meaning rewarding. So, you know, as you say, you know, time and money are both crucial, essential to doing the research we do. And while I think people often imagine historians and scholars to be engaging in solitary work, this work absolutely requires a firm network, right, of of colleagues and of administrators and organizations to fund this work and help connect scholars to the wider world of researchers. Teaching, I consider one of the heart of what I do. My research is absolutely informed and motivated by the teaching. And one of the things I'm proudest of is my US Women's History Survey. I should back up and name that I am the professor of US Gender and Sexuality History at UTD. That's the line that my tenure track job is located in. So I was hired to teach gender and sexuality history. And so with that comes the expectation that every semester I teach the US Women's History Survey to 240 students. One of my greatest, most sort of proudest accomplishments is that when I started teaching this class in 2020, there were 50 students enrolled, and now we're up to 240 students. And I take that responsibility very seriously, and I consider it a great honor to be able to teach this class to students who might not ever have encountered either history and certainly not women's history in their own educated lives. Along with that, I've also I piloted an undergraduate upper level seminar called the Queer South, which is an extremely exciting new field of research, and students can make genuine historical discoveries that they can then share with the community through public history projects beyond the traditional essay. So it's another class that I'm very proud of and look forward to teaching when I return in the fall. I also develop graduate level courses as well as supervise theses and dissertation. And then, of course, there's all the service, the third pillar. But maybe we will talk about that as we continue our conversation.
For sure, I understand that. As I understand, service is really meaningful and really important to you. But it's just very impressive that your book is published by, is it University of North Carolina? And then one of the best press to publish like books on American history. And then also, I also noticed that you won quite a lot of recognitions and awards in teaching, lots of university level teaching awards. So you're definitely very, very highly regarded like teacher. So congratulations, like almost there. So now let's step back a little bit and try to reflect on the tenure process. So what are the most challenging aspects of the tenure process for you? I understand that tenure is a set of standard requirements, but everyone's experience is unique.
Yeah, I think for most people, the most challenging aspect of tenure is meeting these requirements because they are dense and they require, enormous amounts of labor to meet this great diversity of work that we do. I do want to be clear that what I was able to accomplish as I met these sort of challenging standards is not the standard by which scholars should be measured, right? While I think I have the gold standard in terms of financial support to do the work I did, um, I have also a life that is not reflective of most scholars working today. I do not have kids. I've always been able to live with my partner. We've never had to live long distance. And so we've never had to navigate that sort of emotionally taxing and isolating relationship of living long distance. I've not been the primary responsible caregiver for anyone, even my parents when they were sick, right? I always had support. And even my husband is the primary caregiver to our dog. So while I've received the gold standard conditions to do academic labor that I believe everyone from grad school throughout their career should have, the conditions of my work are the standard that we should measure academic health, but not my output. That is not how we should measure academic health because it doesn't, my own personal life does not reflect the reality for most academics. So So your question was about the hardest part about tenure, and unfortunately, I am not representative because, in fact, um, doing the work was extremely supported. I was supported, and I had very few other responsibilities beyond meeting those expectations.
Sounds like for most people, the most challenging aspect is focus, but you do have the golden opportunity to be able to focus. But that doesn't discount the really high quality of your work. So now let's talk about like another aspect that a lot of like faculty really struggle with is how to balance teaching and research. Because no matter how much focus you have, and teaching is still very taxing, it takes up a lot of energy. So how did you balance teaching, research, and service, like the three major aspects in this process? Because all of them takes time, and you apparently take teaching very seriously with all the major recognitions and awards. So, what are the specific teaching strategies do you use?
I love this question because I think balance is so important. But unfortunately, the way that I'm able to balance teaching, research, and service is most likely because I have very little work-life balance. um, so for me, what I love academia, I'm able to focus because there's so many different things to do in any given day. Whether that's organizing a conference panel or doing my research or prepping for a class. They're all different kinds of labor, but um, they all advance my own scholarly goals and in interconnected ways. So when I'm reading for my research, I'm always taking notes for 2384, my US Women's History class, or 4383, my Queer South class. Um, as I'm researching, I'm constantly thinking how I might teach this to students. And even if some of the granular details from primary sources that are getting me so energized in my research, even if those don't make it into my class lectures or onto syllabi, I'm constantly thinking about how I can connect primary source research and historical analysis into my lectures. So I guess what I would say is that my brain is always running on these three tracks. That works for my brain to always be processing information in three different ways. Um, and thinking about in terms of service, thinking about how the work I'm doing might serve our students and serve our colleagues on campus. So it works for my brain to do it.
It sounds your brain is always running, and also you are very responsive to all the emails and messages. You are one of the most responsive like colleagues I've ever seen. So I'm just curious about um, not much work-life balance. All of us don't. So how did you manage the workload and pressure during the tenure process? And I'm gonna add the next question because um, this is a question that is like sometimes I feel selfish, I feel guilty. Is this what do you like to do outside of the job?
Well, and you really are a model for me, and because I know that you pursue other creative outlets and forms of expression and dance, and so I think that it's really important because I don't do anything. Uh, I have I have no hobbies. I think that you are the model here. On I think most academic coaches and mental health experts agree that faculty need to have clear boundaries between their work and their life, and that they need to cultivate meaning and relationships outside of the job. Um, this is not to say that I don't have a rich social life, and that there aren't things I love to do. I love to watch women's basketball. I'm always reading. I love going to concerts and movies. Sometimes I'll even just arrange flowers in my backyard. Going back to my flower shop days when I worked at a shop in high school. But I think that, I do have very firm work-life boundaries when it comes to insisting that when the laptop is shut, when the workday is over, I'm going to have fun. It's just that that fun, doesn't really translate into anything that I can into a new skill, or maybe even new relationships with people outside of my friend network, which is very UTD centered. Even though I am very grateful to have had cultivated other relationships with neighbors and elders. But I would say that I really haven't cultivated a sustained practice of setting challenges or goals for myself outside of my work. Um, and that is definitely something that when I return to, I want to think about how I can find a political home and build sustained relationships with comrades in the city. I especially want to become more engaged in queer activism in the city, especially during current historical moment. But I will say that even though my work-life boundaries are firm, I do find that when I have free time, I usually just want to relax and have fun. So it's always a challenge because even though there are things I want to do, on a Friday afternoon after several days of working at night, I really just want to go outside and tune out.
That boundary is indeed really hard to set. And then when we are not at work, sometimes I just want to lie flat and do nothing. Since we touch on life outside of tenure, and I'm just a very curious person, so I really want to approach tenure in a broader context. So one thing that I feel like during the tenure process is like the financial life. So let's talk about finance a little bit. I feel like this is the question that we are not very transparent, but it is very important to us, as you said, time and money. So that you are able to do the work, you're able to have the focus. So if you don't mind, we're going to dig into some details about the financial life during tenure process. Can you describe Okay, I know it's a very difficult question, and not everyone is willing to answer, but can you describe your starting salary of the job? And you can keep going and start it from that.
Absolutely. I love that you're asking this question. I think it's so important that we share openly about the structural conditions in which we do our work, the material conditions in which we do our work. And, it should not be a shameful or difficult topic, especially because we work in a public record state at a public institution. So I'm happy to share this information with you, but also just to name that anyone who wants to know what we make can file a FOIA, a Freedom of Information or Access to Records request and get it. I was offered 70,000 when I was hired in 2019. And at the time, sort of feels like a prehistory. It feels like a different historical moment. I was very fortunate pre-COVID. I was able to negotiate a starting salary to 75,000. I was also offered $10,000 startup research funds for my first 3 years, which I was able to negotiate to 12,000. I've heard from colleagues who were hired after COVID when there were some austerity measures put into place that they were not able to negotiate. I don't know actually if that's true or not, but I've heard that I was negotiating in a much more open climate than I think might be possible for people today, in just 6 short years later. There were no cost of living raises between 2019 and 2021. So my first raise, which was a raise that all faculty received across the board, as I understand it, where it was a cost of living adjustment. So I believe maybe 3 or 4%. But I received that first COLA raise and my salary went to 78,000 in 2021. We've since all received COLA raises. So as of 24, I $80,000. I also want to name that in 2023-24, that academic year, I was very surprised to receive an endowed faculty fellowship for $15,000. I was able to use that money. Most of my research funding, I put toward teaching materials. So especially in, for example, my Queer South class, my students do not pay for the books that we work with. So I was able to pay for students' books. It included that $15,000 fellowship included some money earmarked for the Queer South class specific. So, I mean, as you can see, a really generous and quite exceptional, I think, for our profession, record of consistent research and teaching material support, as well as cost of living raises.
Raises is actually not common in every single institution. It sounds like your institution is very healthy because I got a 5% salary reduction during the COVID year. Yeah.
At your previous institution?
In my previous institution, we got a salary reduction. Like I worked there for 7 years, and then yeah. So since we are approaching tenure very soon, so one question that we always heard people ask in different social media is the promotional raise comes with tenure. So what is the promotional raise and the situation in your institution? Is it a
I
flat
don't
rate
know.
or for negotiation? This is like people always like, yeah, compare numbers, right? And then also like the percentage. So
Yeah,
for me,
that's a
like if
great.
it's up for negotiation, it's very stressful because I'm a very shy person. I'm not sure about you.
Well, you can have me. I'll go in and negotiate for you. And I, but I actually don't know. This is a great question, and I actually don't know. And I think it speaks to the ways that we don't talk about this enough. I assumed it was a flat rate, but I don't know if there's any negotiations involved or like
So
a flat percentage.
So I guess we'll find out soon. I hope it is a pleasant surprise. So you mentioned that now you're making 90K, and it sounds a very fantastic number because I moved from Iowa, and then also comes with an Intel faculty fellowship for 15K a year. So is it the
Just
Intel?
that 1 year. Oh,
Is
I'm
that
sorry,
just
just
that
that
one
one
year?
year.
1 year. Well, thank you for clarifying. So could you give us as a historian, we love context, right? To contextualize this salary, right? So could you tell us a little bit about how do we contextualize this salary? So what is the cost of living in your area, for example, right? And what access do you have? And then what about like student loans or other loans? So how do you feel about this salary like during the process in terms of the cost of living and other loans and assets?
Yeah. I feel extremely fortunate. I think that I make a not just a living wage, but a kind of wage that supports a very comfortable life. I had come from the Northeast, and I had come from Boston, where I lived for 12 years, before um, ultimately landing in Dallas. And so for me, I thought Dallas was an extremely affordable city. It does unfortunately not the case now. I think, like so many other cities nationwide, the cost of living is skyrocketing. But I was extremely fortunate, and I'll be totally honest. I was extremely fortunate that because my dad had sold the house I grew up in, um, as his life was changing and prior to his death, he would split the proceeds from my childhood home um, between me and my brothers. So I was able to use that to buy a down payment to purchase a home in 1 year after I moved to Dallas for $408,000. Unfortunately, now that house is worth about our house. I mean, the house is now worth $600,000 when I checked Zillow the other day. There's no way we could have afforded our house today. So I'm super mindful of new faculty who are moving to Dallas that they might not have access to, the economic security of property ownership now in the way that I did just 5 years ago. So that's like, so while I at the time found Dallas to be an extremely affordable place, a place where I could, put down roots, I don't know if that's in terms of loans, uh I have $83,000 remaining for my loans, but one of the many reasons why I'm so happy to be at UT Dallas is because it's a public institution. I had always wanted to teach at a public institution. I'm so glad I can do that. But one other benefit, as long as it stays in place, don't know what will happen with the current administration, but there is a program that for any public service employee or any employee who works in the public sector after 10 years of consistent work, their student loans will be forgiven. So if that program is still in place in 2030, my $83,000 that I earn will.
That would be truly amazing to be loan free, I guess. So you do mention that you live with your husband, you live with your partner. So I assume that is a two-person family. So what does your partner do to make a living? You are a professor, so what does he do?
Yeah, so my husband is a freelance book editor. We met when he was working in publishing in Boston. And when I went to go on the job market, after I finished grad school in 2018, he came with and went freelance. We both talk a lot about how he would not be able to do his work, and we would not be able to be so mobile, right? Because he works from home. We would not be able to do that without the security of the healthcare insurance that I get through my job. I feel really fortunate that I don't work for my wages. I work because I love the work. I've worked since I was 16. I think that there's dignity in all work. So while I love this job specifically because of the mandate in my job line to teach women's and queer history, if I can't do the job that I was hired to do, I am prepared and comfortable to find dignity and wages in other labor. But like so many Americans, I rely on my job for my family's healthcare. Um, as a freelancer, my husband would not really be able to work autonomously in a sort of secure, economically secure, and um, uh, life without the healthcare in particular that my job provides.
That makes perfect sense. Another question that a lot of us are interested in is other incomes. So just now we talk about salary, we talk about raises, we talk about a flat rate percentage of promotional raise that comes with tenure. So since you are an author, you are a published author, and I also know that you give many talks a year, and then for the subject that you are deeply engaged in. So I'm gonna be intrusive here again. What other income did you have during the tenure process?
I think it's really important to highlight when and how scholars' work is and is not compensated. Um, Particularly after my first book was published, I started to get requests for manuscript reviews of other books and articles. This is a standard part of the peer review process in academia. And very often, those requests will come with an honorarium, or you have your choice. Do you want a check for $100 or $200, or do you want twice that amount in books? There are also occasionally, um, honoraria that come with speaking engagements, like you said, though typically my speaking engagements are unpaid. Um, and then there are also honoraria for engaging in projects like this one, because I know that you are very mindfully compensating your guests for their time with honoraria. So yes, there are small, and I should also say that I do also receive royalty checks once a year for my book that was published in 2022. So these are all really, I think, important ways to recognize the labor that academics do outside of their jobs. But these are not the kinds of payments that a person could live on, right? These look like occasional checks of $100 to maybe $400 a year, right? So these are not, so I think honoraria are important gestures to recognize the value of how scholars are contributing to historical life or intellectual life outside of academia. But these are certainly not the kinds of payments that people can live on.
For sure. Although we like what we do, but it is nice to be paid for what we do, right? So do you teach extra classes? I know many faculty voluntarily teach take on more course load in order to get extra income. And then another question that I'm curious about is we always have this dream We can write to make a living. So what about loyalties of your book so far? I know that I'm not gonna get loyalties like for this lifetime because so far I sold 300 copies and I probably bought 150 myself.
Well, if you are not an owner of Un's book, you need to buy it because you are a beautiful writer, a beautiful storyteller. It's a fascinating story. I absolutely could not live on my writing or the income from my writing. I think I got $450 this year in royalties for my book. Um,
Another question is about if the $450 for royalty. Another question is about some institutions have a policy that you can take on extra courses and get extra income when you're on the tenure track. What about the situation in your institution?
Right. So I know that I have colleagues who have taken on other teaching, like an additional teaching class or teach during the summer. But that is one of the, and I don't, and I totally understand the value, especially, for example, a small reading seminar would really help if there are some books I wanted to read for my own research. So I see the value of taking on additional teaching, but that is one of the boundaries that I set for myself. I feel very fortunate that I don't need to teach in the summer to pay, for example, property taxes. I save money so that I can pay my taxes without taking on additional teaching loads because I give my all to the two classes that I teach in an academic year, and that's really my boundary for my time management.
It sounds like there are a lot of unpaid labors, and also tenure process is like extremely exhausting. So it does take up a lot of your time. So you won't be able to make a lot of money outside of the job. So now we are close to the end of the conversation. And if you want to reflect on the whole tenure process, what are the key things did you learn so far?
It's been a really interesting process, basically across the 12 years since I started graduate school and the 6 years that I've been fortunate enough to be on the tenure track. I'm really grateful also for this opportunity to pause and reflect on what I've learned. I think that, you know, the most important thing is not working for tenure, but working for the work itself. Um, Meeting the demands and the expectations of tenure should come from a drive to do the kind of work that meets my own personal standards rather than meeting tenure standards. I find meaning and purpose in the research, the teaching, the service that I do. Um, and I find security in tenure, I do. But I also recognize that tenure is contingent, and especially in our state, especially in public higher ed in our state, it's contingent and contested. So I don't treat it as a guaranteed job for life. The key thing that I've learned then, as part of this shrinking minority of scholars who are extremely fortunate to go up for tenure, I don't want to minimize the privilege that and the achievements of reaching this stage in my career. But ultimately, I want my career to be defined by the work I do and not by my title. I guess I could also say, I don't want to seem cavalier that, the work is more important than my title. Um, but when I think about how tenure changed me throughout this process or how I adapted with the idea of tenure looming, in my mind and my career track, I really felt my pre-tenure status most acutely in the classroom. Yeah, I was so afraid of negative reviews. I thought one negative student evaluation would torpedo my career. And now, fortunately, with the time and the distance, and hopefully returning with the institution's admission into, right, a member of the, tenured faculty investing in our institution together. With that time and distance, I think that um, my priorities now are focusing on what I can control in the classroom. um, and what I can't control. So post tenure, I really hope to measure my effectiveness in the classroom according to the standards of what I see students doing and learning, right? According to my own standards of evidence of student learning, and not what students think about me personally. That is not, I think, what drives me, right? I don't want students to personally like me. I want them to learn history. And so I think bringing some of the same inner standards that I bring to my own research, bringing that to the classroom instead of being so fearful. And it is true that if I return with tenure, I will have security, right, to trust my own standards for student achievement rather than external evaluations.
It is very important to know that tenure doesn't really, if you switch jobs in the future and then tenure doesn't really follow along. So it only like be in the institution. So it is a process that's not necessarily the ultimate goal. So let's switch perspective a little bit. In this process, um, what do your colleagues, I don't want to say it's you because I'm not sure if you're comfortable talking about it. So what do your colleagues, like typically say the institution or other colleagues could possibly have done to help them in the tenure process?
I think for junior faculty on the tenure track, and in particular, my colleagues, but other colleagues I know at other institutions, um, absolutely support, check in, sharing materials, sharing tenure materials, just regular ongoing info sharing, I think is really important to demystify the process and to share details and stories about everyone's individual process, exactly what you are doing here. And I think that that is really important to support the next generation of scholars. But ultimately, I think what is what I would what I tell junior faculty, what I would tell junior faculty on the tenure track is to prioritize what is meaningful and what is rewarding in your work. That's the kind of support I would want to give to someone on the tenure track now. Prioritize what's meaningful and rewarding, and prioritize what you need to do in your life to support that work. I would really, it's counterintuitive, but I would tell junior faculty to cultivate their life outside of work, so that they're not like me, where their life is consumed by work, but also just to orient a North Star that is driven by what brought us to academia in the first place, what brought us to our research in the first place, prioritize what matters to us, rather than trying to meet these institutional standards that were not made for us. I just really think that by centering the work around what is meaningful and rewarding to you, you will meet the standards for tenure along the way. But you'll also arrive there, hopefully, with your heart and spirit more intact.
So use tenure as a transportation or a device, like to deliver or drive us where we want to be. Okay, that's great advice. So you are so close to tenure, like April the 1st, you're gonna get the news, and I'm very sure you're gonna get it. So what next?
If I'm fortunate enough to receive tenure, um, I really look forward to returning. So what I do see tenure, the message receiving tenure communicates to me is that the institution sees me as a long-term partner, right? A long-term stakeholding member of our faculty community. So I really look forward to participating in faculty governance and community building. I think that faculty governance is only as real as we make it. So I want to help to build the kind of institution that supports all students and that values creating thoughtful and intellectually fulfilled humans. I should also say that I will be coming out when I return to campus. I'm married to a man, but I am a queer woman. And so I'm very private and I prefer to set firm boundaries, especially with students. Um, but with these escalating attacks that we're seeing in our state on LGBTQ people, and especially on campus with the loss of our gender center, I think it's really important to publicly identify myself. with our ongoing struggles. And so I look forward to rebuilding and repairing queer spaces on campus within my limited capacity as faculty. So it's both for students and for my colleagues and for staff. Students have consistently proven that they're the most effective leaders and caretakers for each other, but I want to find ways that I can support the work in my limited role as faculty.
Although you describe tenure as just a process, but to a lot of us who are listening right now, tenure is quite a milestone, something magical. So, in terms of your goals in general, how do you think getting tenure change the way that you work and live your life?
It feels really scandalous to say this, given the obscene privilege of reaching this milestone. And because I work for my work, right? I have not worked for tenure, though, of course, job security in an embattled field, in an embattled discipline, that does matter a lot, right? That is a measure of tremendous privilege and good fortune. But I but because I work for my work, I don't think tenure will change how I live my life or do my work. I think most importantly, it will make me less afraid to do the job that I was hired to do, particularly at a point where I think that historians of gender and sexuality are meant to feel afraid. Um, Even though I know that tenure is contested and contingent, the recognition, right, that I'm returning as a stakeholder member of our faculty community is going to make me less afraid to do the job I was hired to do.
So, I believe this was also the reason that tenure was created, like at the first place, right? So, thank you so much for sharing today, Annie. Before we end this very valuable conversation, what other things would you like us to know about you?
I think the most important thing is that this conversation is just one of the many ways, like one of the many reasons why I love my specific job. I didn't just try to get tenure in general. I wanted to get tenure at this institution because of colleagues like you in particular, right? That really matters to me. The relationships that we've built, and the students we have, and the work that we get to do, it's meaningful to me because I get to do it with you.
That's very kind of you to say that, Annie. I guess with one faculty just left and one faculty passed away recently, and I do have concerns about the future of our program. So hopefully both of us will hear about the good news soon. Thank you so much again, and hope to talk to you again very soon.
Oh, me too, and thank you so much.
See you. Bye, Annie.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tenure, a Game Manual, make sure to check out our other episodes. Or if you just can't get enough of us, follow us on social media at Tenure, a Game Manual. This episode was produced by Sebastian Bancesco. Our executive producer and host is Dr. An Lee, and today's guest was Dr. Annie Gray Fisher. Sebastian Bancesco is also our editor, and we are generously sponsored by the Dean of the Bass School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology, the Provost Teaching Fellow Program, and the AXH Grant. Thanks for listening. We've now reached our special segment where we ask everyday students, what's your favorite memory or experience with one of your professors? Today we hear from Sarah, an accounting major at UT Dallas.
One of my favorite memories would probably be from Professor Zoltan, and I was in her managerial accounting class. I was struggling a lot at the beginning of the semester, especially since I had just transferred over to UTD from community college, and I went into her office hours expressing my concerns, and I was met with a lot of understanding and compassion. And ultimately, I even ended up switching my major over to accounting from information systems, and it was solely because of how much I love that class. I love the way that it was structured. It was easy to follow along, and having a professor that was just so kind and patient, understanding. It made all the difference in the world.